It's not a stretch to say that even those who were fans of Rachel Reed's Game Changer series before the Heated Rivalry show was announced could never have imagined just how big it would get.
Yes! I knew.
Despite being a small-budget production with only 6 episodes, Heated Rivalry has found success in a seemingly impossible way. Records have been broken, real-world sports and queer athletes have been uplifted, and fans are left wanting more. The show's first season was an anomaly, and in the best sense of the word. It surprised both the fans and the studios that funded it. Let's take a look at what made this unlikely triumph happen, and what comes next for the series. Before the Heated Rivalry TV show, Rachel Reed wrote and released 6 books in her Game Changer series. 4 of the books follow different characters, and their stories are all portrayed as happening concurrently. The other 2 books, Heated Rivalry and The Long Game, specifically focus on Shane Hollander and Ilya Rozanov. These characters serve as the leads for the Heated Rivalry show, which also coincidentally borrowed its name from Book 2 of Game Changers. Without spoiling too much of the books, because they are absolutely worth reading, the main through line for the series does follow Shane and Ilya. And despite what some may assume given the genre, there is a complex and emotionally hitting story. For those who don't know, the books and show portray fairly intimate details of romance between the men they're about. In Reed's own words, quote, "I like to write cute smut about hockey players and other people. Mostly about hockey players, though." The Long Game was released in 2022, and while the book series certainly had its fans, it was still relatively unknown. Of course, this tends to be the case with romance novels given their content. That said, director-producer Jacob Tierney of Letterkenny fame reached out to Reed in 2023 after the Washington Post ran an article about hockey romance novels and previously listening to the audiobook version of Game Changers to discuss the possibility of a TV adaptation. It turned out the difficulty lay in creating a faithful adaptation while retaining the, finer aspects of a romance novel. The sex. How could this story be presented properly on screen if scrubbed of one of its most important plot devices? Queer stories have become more prevalent in recent years, with new original series and even some other adaptations like Heartstopper or Love, Simon, but a good portion of these focus on teenagers. They're great representation for young viewers, and I think they do very well at depicting real experiences. Perhaps even more important, they depict queer joy. These shows and others like them have done great work in fighting many long-standing stigmas. However, there is one major difference between these titles and their source material, if applicable, and Heated Rivalry. In an interview for Episodic Medium, Tierney addressed this saying, quote, "The thing that is so fundamentally different in Heated Rivalry is sex." And so I was like, okay, will anyone want this with that? And the thing that was very obvious to me is that they were inseparable. Sex is character development. It's not just a random sex scene in every episode. They learn about each other and they learn about themselves through this. So it came to be that Heated Rivalry would be told through the same lens on screen that it was on the page. And, not to get ahead of myself here, its impact was even greater for it. Discussions went on for some time, but in January 2025 it became known that Canadian streamer Crave had picked up the show for a 6-episode season. Buzz began immediately from existing fans of the books, but the show really began its internet takeover when a trailer was released that year on October 9th. On November 20th, 9 days before the series premiere was to release on Crave, HBO Max announced that it had acquired distribution rights for the US and Australia, largely in response to the considerable online interest it had generated. Heated Rivalry's cast included some big names like Francois Arnaud and Christina Chang, but the 2 lead roles were played by actors that were all but entirely unknown prior to this. Hudson Williams and Connor Story, playing Shane Hollander and Ilya Rozanov respectively, displayed a rare connection both on and off screen. After a chemistry read, they both felt the other was the right choice, with Williams specifically telling Jacob Tierney, quote, "The other guy was good, but Connor felt like he was going to pin me down and fuck me." And on that note, Heated Rivalry opens on a young man standing outside a Canadian hockey arena. Someone comes to introduce himself to this loner, and both are named as Ilya Rozanov and Shane Hollander respectively. They have a short and mostly one-sided exchange before Hollander excuses himself with a hint of budding rivalry.
"You will not be so nice when we beat you."
It is December 2008, and the International Prospect Cup is on. A crushing defeat for the Canadian team leads into the draft, and the rivalry continues to build.
See you at the draft.
6 months later, the draft takes place in Los Angeles. Rozanov is picked first by the Boston Raiders, and Hollander is picked second by the Montreal Metros. Both players seem to be a bit distracted and restless, leading to a moment where Rozanov shares his water with Hollander. A new kind of tension flares. Another 6 months pass, and this time Canada beats Russia in the Prospect Cup. With the score now a bit more even, the competition begins to stiffen.
See you in October.
Following another 6-month gap, Hollander and Rozanov reunite for a commercial shoot. In the showers after the shoot, the Russian silently expresses physical interest in the Canadian. Later that night, Rosanov knocks on Hollander's door and the two spend some time exploring each other. 4 months later, just before the All-Star game in Nashville, Hollander and Rosanov are corralled together for a joint press conference. Following the game and a hookup cut short, Rosanov takes Hollander's phone and inputs his number. So begins a text thread between Lily and Jane. Another 4 months pass and Hollander wins Rookie of the Year at the MLH Awards in Las Vegas. He steps out to the roof where he finds a brooding Rosanov, and they have a somewhat tense conversation before Rosanov kisses Hollander. This causes Hollander to become angry and storm off.
See you next season.
Episode 2 opens on Hollander and Rosanov training over the 2011 summer in Montreal and Moscow respectively, while Lily antagonizes Jane through text. Multiple seasons and mini-games come and go while the conversation continues at a glacial pace. In fall of 2013, Montreal is preparing for another home game against Boston, while Lily escalates the antagonism. Rosanov is teased by Cliff Marlowe in the locker room for blushing before the game. After the game, Rosanov goes to a building owned by Hollander for some extracurricular activities. Unbeknownst to him, Hollander actually purchased the building specifically for this purpose, so they could have a safe space away from prying eyes. This is an important part of Hollander's characterization that is given a bit more focus in the book. The two share a surprisingly tender moment as Rosanov is getting ready to leave. They discuss the upcoming Sochi Olympics and Rosanov leans in for a kiss. Winter 2014 arrives with the Sochi Olympics and Russia is handed a crushing defeat on home ice, knocking them out of the medal running. Hollander sits in a cafe checking his messages, but Lily does not seem to be in a responding mood. Scott Hunter and Carter Vaughn join and discuss the games. They decide to go to the men's figure skating event.
Fucking balls of steel, man.
Back in Montreal, Hollander arrives at Hayden Pike's house to watch the MLH championship game. The Boston Raiders win the cup and Rosanov hoists it in celebration, with Hollander looking on, clearly touched by the moment. Summer rolls around, as do the MLH awards again, and Hollander and Rosanov have been tapped to present the award for most sportsmanlike player together. During the presentation, they do a scripted bit where Rosanov asks for a selfie since this is a rare occasion. Now, if you've read the books...
You don't know this yet, but you do.
Though the bit didn't actually require it, he took multiple photos with his personal phone. This is a surprise tool that will help us later. Hollander storms into a bathroom backstage after their presentation, clearly frustrated. Rosanov follows and they share another surprisingly tender moment. After the ceremony ends, Hollander goes to Rosanov's hotel room to give him his reward for winning MVP. The two athletes get more intimate than they ever have before, both physically and emotionally, but Hollander ultimately leaves and they both immediately regret it. These first 2 episodes are very chaotic. Between secrets and time skips, the characters don't get to develop much. Some, like my boyfriend, have also noted that Rosanov specifically comes across as very toxic in this sequence. While I do see that point, I also want to remind everyone that this began when Rosanov and Hollander were both 17. Neither of them saw an opportunity or even a possibility for more until many years later. Episode 3 opens back on the Sochi Cafe with Hollander, Hunter, and Vaughn, though this time with a slightly different perspective. This then immediately cuts back to 4 months prior with Scott Hunter on a run in New York City. He stops into a smoothie shop called Straw and Berry, and has a bit of a moment with the initially sleeping juicer, Kip. Barista? Blender? I don't know what the proper name is, but I'm not sure it's any of these, despite what Google says. Either way, Robbie GK was a perfect cast. This one is difficult because it had to condense down a second novel, this time into a single episode. All the major points are there, but it could have filled a series of its own. Between the previous night's game commentators and the paper that Kip is reading the next morning, it becomes clear that Scott has been in a bit of a slump for a while. He returns and mentions a bit of superstition to Kip. Saturday morning rolls around and Scott comes in for his new usual just like clockwork. He asks if he can stay a while because he has some emails to catch up on.
Sure, Dan.
And ends up offering Kip tickets to the night's game. Kip and his best friend Elena find themselves in Scott Hunter's personal seats, and despite Scott making 2 separate passes to wave at him, Kip is still completely in denial. Kip arrives to a serving gig and is handed a tray, then promptly exits the door directly into Scott. Fortunately, he is understanding. He asks Kip if he has plans later and they end up back at his apartment. Scott asks Kip to stay when he finds him dressing to leave. The next morning, Scott wakes to find his bed empty. After some morning cardio and some smoothies from Kip, they talk.
Is it okay? Can I be too intense?
So, Kip ends up staying, and time begins to pass rather quickly. Eventually, Scott and Kip decide to go to an art exhibition, but it proves to be too much for Scott's anxiety. Though Kip is very understanding about the whole situation, the charade continues. One day, Kip comes across a pair of blue socks with bananas on them, a reference to the game-changing smoothie, and surprises Scott with them. Elena and Kip discuss the gala they are going to, and Scott gifts Kip a tuxedo to wear to the event. At the gala, Scott and Kip are finally able to spend some time together in public. Scott dances with Elena and she grills him about his actions and intentions for the future, leaving him with an important reminder.
And so do you.
Afterwards, Scott is picked up in a car, which then picks up Kip in a back alley. Scott later shows up to the Kingfisher on Kip's birthday, though he only looks through the window for a moment before walking away. The episode closes with him preparing for an Olympic game, still wearing the socks Kip gave him. I love how well Scott and Kip's story was portrayed in this episode. Admittedly, I did miss some of the finer details, like Scott's offer to pay off Kip's student loan debt and the conversation that followed, but this was a hard-hitting hour of television. And according to the response to my Heated Rivalry edits, as well as other sentiment online, Scott and Kip may be the more popular couple. Episode 4 opens with a montage of training, games, and 2 cup wins for the Metros. Summer 2016 brings another montage, though this one is slightly different. Both players are still training, but Rosanov is taking care of his visibly ill father, and Lily seems to be less responsive. In some ways, I like the way the timeline is handled here more than in the first 2 episodes. This was obviously done to make room for the 2 major events that take place in episode 4, and it's a decision I appreciate. While the Metros are in Boston for their next game against the Raiders, Hollander receives a message from Lily, which Hayden notices. He ignores his teammate, telling him it's nothing, and makes his way to Rosanov's home. They quickly get down to business, but Rosanov surprises Hollander afterward by asking him to stay. Hollander wakes up in Rosanov's arm, and Rosanov ends up making lunch for them both. After finishing their tuna melts, Rosanov receives a call from his brother. When he returns to the living room, Hollander expresses concern over Rosanov's father, but this is quickly brushed off.
You speak Russian.
This closeness quickly leads to distraction via other pursuits. During a particularly intimate moment, Ilya and Shane use each other's first names for what they quickly realize is the first time. Hollander is unsure how to process this and quickly makes up an excuse to leave, while Rosanov is confused and maybe even a bit hurt. Hollander meets and begins dating movie star Rose Landry, which gets noticed by everyone. Both star players end up at a Montreal club. They find their way to the dance floor, and Hollander and Rosanov lock eyes once they spot each other. This scene and the montage of disappointment that follows is the reason why that All the Things She Said remix seems to have been everywhere lately. I love this sequence a lot, both in visuals and pacing. The decision to intersperse the dance floor scene with footage of Rosanov in the shower and Hollander in bed with Rose really highlights the intense longing and missed opportunity. Plus, it's a feast for the eyes, both in pretty colors and pretty people. This episode also introduces Harrison Brown as Connors. While The Long Game did introduce a trans character named Max, I love that this show made an effort to include trans actors in this moment as well. Episode 5 opens with Rose getting dressed after a night spent with Hollander. Hollander goes to dinner with Rose, and she seems to have something she wants to discuss with him. Hollander finally relents and opens up to her, which brings them even closer together. This conversation contains a quote that is not just the best thing that one of Rose's gay boyfriends ever told her, but might be up there as one of the best from the whole series.
I kind of prefer being the hole rather than the peg.
The 2017 All-Star Game arrives, this year in Tampa Bay. Hollander encounters Rosanov sitting at a bar and joins him. What could pass for casual conversation ensues as they both try to figure out what kind of a situation the other is in. Hollander clarifies that he and Rose are no longer together, though have remained friends.
We're just not compatible.
At the hotel pool, Rosanov is entertaining many of the All-Star's children with games in the water. He expresses a much softer side of himself, encouraging the children to do their best and allowing them to win. Footage of the All-Star Game is cut into this sequence, where the two demonstrate a palpable chemistry. This is another great example of the show passing time in a way that feels natural, while still giving enough information to move the plot along. That night, Hollander comes to Rosanov's room and they have a real conversation about feelings. Sometime later, Shane returns to his hotel room.
Good night, Shane.
Good night, Ilya.
A few weeks later, in the Metro's home locker room, Shane hears from Hayden and JJ that Ilya did not fly with the Raiders to Nashville for their next game. Finally, that night, Ilya video calls Shane as he is reading in bed. Ilya reveals that his father has died and that he will be back in the US soon. At a memorial dinner for Grigory Rosanov, Ilya excuses himself and is confronted by his brother Alexei. The confrontation turns physical briefly before Svetlana walks in. Ilya makes an offer and Alexei quietly walks away. Svetlana tells Ilya that she will always love and support him, and that she hopes Jane knows how lucky he is. Shane receives a message from Lily in his hotel room asking if he can talk, which prompts him to run off to a stairwell for privacy. Shane asks how he is doing, and Ilya finally admits that he is not okay. He also says that English is too difficult at that moment, prompting Shane to suggest that he say everything that is on his mind in Russian. At the end of a long monologue in Russian, he mentions Svetlana. She loves him, and he loves her, but not like...
Не так, как я люблю тебя.
This scene was huge, because the book only indicated that Ilya's monologue happened, and didn't confirm any I love yous until afterward. Hearing Ilya's words, even if I had to read subtitles to understand, was a lot more impactful. Ilya's monologue also brings up another source of homophobia that is worth highlighting. His earlier hotel room conversation with Shane briefly turned to the idea of living more openly, which seemed to terrify him. This is both because homosexuality is illegal in Russia, as he says, but also due to the implied homophobia and abuse he faced from his brother. In pretty much every conversation they have, Alexei calls Ilya a specific slur or otherwise makes disparaging comments. This is a reminder that, for many of us, shame begins at home. But it also plants a seed of hope in the idea that home can be wherever and whoever you choose. 1 week later, Montreal is playing Boston again. The Metros, and specifically Shane, are having a great game until he gets laid out by Marleau while going for a goal. Referees clear the ice as medics come to take care of Shane, but Ilya refuses to leave his side until he is pushed away. Ilya pays a visit to a very doped up Shane at the hospital to make sure he is okay. He expresses his concern for Shane, and Shane, in his much more free state of mind, invites Ilya to his cottage over the summer before the nurse comes in. In May of 2017, Shane is still recovering at his parents' house and is having a phone conversation with Rose. The family watches Boston get beat by New York, and Una points out that Ilya is playing with bruised ribs, which Shane asks him about after the game. The next week sees New York win the championship. Scott Hunter hoists the cup and does a victory lap with it, but the smile fades from his face as his teammates' families begin flooding the ice. He decides in that moment to bring Kip down to the ice, and everyone watches as they kiss on live television. Immediately after, Ilya calls Shane.
I'm coming to the cottage.
I'll Believe in Anything stands as my favorite episode of the season. Everything prior to this point has been leading here, and everything after is just a bonus. And it's no coincidence that much of this episode was a direct one-to-one with the book. Episode 6 begins in the Kingfisher with Scott giving an acceptance speech on TV at the MLH Awards. July rolls around and Shane picks Ilya up from the Ottawa airport. On the way back to the cottage, they have potentially the most casual conversation they've ever been able to have. I said that everything after episode 5 was a bonus, and I meant it. The book reads the same way in my opinion. This is the escape these boys never expected, and the beginning of a new chapter they never saw coming. They arrive to the cottage and Shane proposes that they say how they really feel while they're there before Ilya gets distracted by manhandling the staff. Ilya and Shane discuss Shane's parents over the too many burgers Shane made. During the evening, they sit outside by the fire pit and Ilya gets scared by a stupid Canadian wolf bird. He also opens up to Shane about his mother. The next day, Ilya floats the idea of signing with a Canadian team next year since he will be a free agent. That evening, Ilya mentions that he could marry Svetlana since she is American and that would come with citizenship. This gives Shane a nearly terminal case of irritation face. He says that Ilya could find someone, implying a woman in this case, that he wants to marry for real and still get a passport out of it. Ilya responds that he could do that, if not for this problem he has. Spoiler, it's Shane. After some exaggerated antagonism, Shane asks if Ilya wants the problem to go away.
I don't ever want that problem to ever go away.
Shane immediately shifts into planning mode. He wakes Ilya up in the middle of the night to propose a new plan for the long game. Ottawa is in need of a star center, so if Ilya were to sign there, he would be much closer to Shane and would have a path to Canadian citizenship. They could start a charity together, which would serve as both an actual way to do something that they both care about and a cover for their public friendship. Ilya is flabbergasted by all of this and confirms with Shane that this is all what he wants. To be together, for real. Of course, the answer is yes. They both use the L word for the first time, though Ilya says it first. Real ones know he fell first, especially if you've read the books. Argue with the wall. Anyway.
Does it fucking kill you too?
What anymore?
Shane randomly asks Ilya his mother's name. He says they should start a hockey summer camp for kids and give the proceeds to mental health causes, specifically suicide prevention, implying that the foundation would be named for Irina.
She would have loved you. Like I love you.
The pair are seen kissing by Shane's father, David, and this causes Shane to have a bit of a meltdown. Ilya reassures him and offers to go with him to talk to his parents. Una and David Hollander stand to greet their son as he arrives with an unexpected guest. Shane asks if they can all sit down, and they all end up at the dining room table as Shane and Ilya try to explain the situation. Una, overwhelmed, excuses herself and has a touching moment with Shane outside, then immediately shifts into planning mode. Back at the table, everyone is eating pasta that David made, and Una is running through all the brands she wants to reach out to. Talk of Ilya moving to Ottawa and other plans for the future overwhelms Shane, but Ilya reminds him that his family and his boyfriend are here, and everything will be okay.
Since rookie season.
Summer before.
Shane and Ilya head out after making plans for Una and David to come over for dinner, and they promise to text first. Credits roll as the couple drives back to the cottage. Heated Rivalry depicts the unlikeliest of relationships and shows that anything can be possible in love. The thing is, both Shane and Ilya's relationship, as well as Scott and Kip's, aren't unlikely because they're men. It's because they were never able to see pursuing a man as a real option until they found someone who made it seem impossible to do anything but. This is of course due to the stifling circumstances they find themselves in, but it's also because it's not common to see two men allowed to just be madly and passionately in love. That's why this story is so important. It shows everyone who watches it what can be possible. I mentioned other queer stories that have become popular in recent years earlier in the video, but what sets this apart is the fact that it happens in the most unusual of circumstances. These are men from vastly different backgrounds, and in Shane and Ilya's case from entirely different parts of the world. Stories about kids falling in love while still in school are important, but so are stories like this. There is no one-size-fits-all answer to relationships, intimacy, or love. Now, that was a lot of information and a lot of time skips. I've seen many people talk about how difficult the story of Heated Rivalry can be to follow, so let's make a timeline of events. December 2008. Russia beats Canada in the International Prospect Cup. Shane and Ilya meet for the first time. June 2009. Ilya and Shane are drafted number 1 by the Boston Raiders and number 2 by the Montreal Metros respectively in the MLH draft. This is where we see them work out together and Ilya offers Shane his water. December 2009. Canada beats Russia in the International Prospect Cup. June 2010. Shane and Ilya are brought together for a commercial shoot at Ilya's suggestion. This is where they first encounter each other in the showers and leads to a later encounter in Shane's hotel room. October 2010. Montreal beats Boston at home in the first MLH game that Shane and Ilya play against each other. February 2011. Shane and Ilya's first All-Star game. Ilya breaks the accuracy record, which Shane immediately shatters. They have a second encounter in Ilya's hotel room and exchange numbers. March-ish 2011. 2 weeks after the All-Star game, a Montreal home game versus Boston is cancelled due to snow. Summer, maybe July, 2011. Shane wins Rookie of the Year at the MLH Awards. He has a tense discussion with Ilya on the hotel's roof. Fall, likely October, 2013. Boston plays another game at Montreal and Ilya goes to Shane's building afterward. Around the same time, Scott Hunter goes into Straw and Berry after a run and meets Kip. The episode Hunter and its events take place during the 2013-2014 season. February 2014. The Sochi Olympics take place. Russia is knocked out of medal contention early. March 9th, 2014. Kip's birthday. This month and day is admittedly from the book, so it is possible that this could have been changed for the show. Continuity-wise, as far as what is shown on screen at least, Kip's birthday party is shown before the Olympics, but this isn't necessarily definitive. May 2014. Boston wins the MLH championship. Summer, maybe July, 2014. Shane and Ilya present the Most Sportsmanlike award at the MLH Awards, and they do the "Can I get a selfie" bit. Ilya wins MVP. Shane goes to his hotel room afterward to congratulate him, in exactly the way he requested, and they are both disappointed when he leaves. May 2015. Montreal wins the MLH championship. May 2016. Montreal wins the MLH championship. October 2016. Shane accompanies Hayden and his kids to the Montreal Aquarium. Fall/winter 2016-2017. Much of this is unspecified. A number of things happen. Shane and Ilya use each other's first names for the first time in an intimate moment and Shane freaks out. Shane meets Rose Landry and begins a relationship with her, which is captured by paparazzi. The famous "all the things she said" scene takes place. And finally, Shane comes out to Rose over dinner after some prodding on her part, and they commit to remaining best friends. February 2017. Shane and Ilya are put on the same team for the first time at the All-Star game. They show great chemistry during the game and grow much closer through time spent before and after. March, I'm assuming, 2017. 2 weeks after the All-Star game, Grigory Rozanov dies and Ilya returns home. 1 week later, Shane is injured by Marleau in a game against Boston. May 2017. The New York Admirals win the MLH championship. Scott brings Kip down to the ice and kisses him on live television, inspiring many, including Ilya and Shane. July 2017. The events at the cottage take place. Shane and Ilya make a plan for the long game, and Yuna and David learn about their relationship. There may be some specific events I missed, but these are all the major ones as they happened on screen. Personally, I love the way the story is told, and it is very reflective of how the books are written for any who haven't read them. Events happen concurrently, and each character has their own perspective on any given moment in time. It gives a real sense that both time and lives continue on their own trajectory, but I understand why it can be confusing. Having so many perspectives and focusing primarily on events where specific characters are together leads to a lot of jumping around. Hopefully this view helps to clarify some things. So, we know that Heated Rivalry has been a global phenomenon, but what do the numbers actually say? According to HBO Max, the series reached an average of 10.6 million viewers per episode, growing over 300% between the season's premiere and finale. This was due in large part to word of mouth from the show's fans flooding social media and bringing in more viewers. The influx in viewers also contributed to HBO Max's decision to acquire distribution rights for the show in additional countries. Looking at reviews, it isn't hard to see why. Heated Rivalry holds an 8.8 out of 10 overall rating on IMDb, with its 5th episode holding a 9.8. This episode, titled I'll Believe in Anything, broke a record previously thought untouchable on its release. For a brief period, it tied Breaking Bad's Ozymandias as the highest rated TV episode of all time, being one of only 2 with a perfect rating on the IMDb platform. And this with well over 5,000 ratings. While the perfect score did not last, and I'm not going to even speculate about reasons why, I'll Believe in Anything and The Cottage remain as the 2 highest rated episodes of the show. Rotten Tomatoes tells a similar story, with the tomato meter sitting at 96%, 100% if you highlight only, quote, top critics, and a popcorn meter sitting at 88%. Metacritic seems to mostly share the same consensus, though it has considerably fewer critic reviews. Of the 7 critic reviews, Heated Rivalry retains a Metacritic score of 67. One review provides some context that can help explain some of the more harsh critiques given. According to The Hollywood Reporter, critics were only sent the first 2 episodes of the show. These also happen to be the 2 with the most chaotic timeline, and where both characters do in fact start out as literal teenagers. That said, RogerEbert.com did note that, quote, Williams and Story share a chemistry so intense that it rivals Bogart and Bacall, shaping this series into not only one of the most entertaining shows of the year, but also one of its most significant. User reviews seem to range between fairly grounded and just angry. Certain themes are retained from the critic reviews, mainly that the first 2 episodes serve as more of something you have to get through to be able to experience the rest. Not to get ahead of myself here, but I do think that may have been the point that both Rachel Reed and Jacob Tierney intended. Outside of their successful careers, Shane and Ilya were not having a great time on their own during this period. Imagine reconciling your attraction to, and later feelings for, your biggest rival in a notoriously homophobic sport, and tell me if you'd be having fun. Anyway, since the user score sits at an overwhelmingly positive 8.4 out of 10, and much of what those reviews say are things that I will be highlighting in my own analysis here, let's see what the negative ones say. By and large, they mostly focus on some combination of 3 perceptions: gratuitous sex, underdeveloped writing, and a supposedly wooden performance from Hudson Williams. Now, if I might bring my friend Hannah back out for a moment,
I do understand that haters are just gonna hate.
of course these things were always going to be said, whether or not people actually watched the show or even liked it. So why respond? Mostly because context is important. There are generally good reasons behind every decision, even if they aren't always obvious or may have led to a different outcome if someone else was in charge. What are the reasons the show, especially at the beginning, focuses a lot on sex? Well, for one thing, it was adapted from a romance novel. If you came into this not expecting some of that, I have to assume you either weren't familiar with the source material, or didn't expect them to be faithful to it. There are 2 points I want to make here. One is that Western society, and specifically American society, is very puritanical about sex, and is occupied by a not insignificant group of people trying to make it even more so. And I'm not even specifically talking about gay sex. The issue of homophobia, while still present, is secondary here. There are people that genuinely believe in their aggressive idea that sex shouldn't be publicly discussed or acknowledged, and that it should only be engaged in for procreation as opposed to recreation. Secondly, sex is used to advance the plot. It is part of the story of 2 men who find that they have something in common more than just the love of hockey, and whose connection is fueled, especially initially, by those physical encounters. It is vulnerability, it's affection, and at the end of the day, it's also fun. I do to some degree understand the point about writing for the show being underdeveloped, because it does all feel very dense. So many things are happening constantly that we don't really get to see any of the day-to-day minutiae get developed. But again, context. Season 1 of Heated Rivalry engaged in the monumental task of taking the content of 2 full novels and condensing them down into 6 hours of television. This necessitates some very intentional decisions regarding where to focus time and resources, and what elements will need to be cut to make it work. It's an unfortunate fact, but for anyone who has this complaint, I would strongly encourage you to read the books. As for the comments regarding Hudson Williams' portrayal of Shane, well, I'll try to keep this short. Shane is a canonically autistic character, according to Rachel Reed, and Hudson Williams played him that way even before learning this fact based on how he was written in the script. He based that performance on his father, who is also on the spectrum. Autistic people tend to have difficulty with things like interaction and social cues. Expression can be difficult as well. A few words spoken aloud can contain a world of meaning in our heads. We unfortunately don't tend to make good first impressions and need structure and specificity for things to make sense. If you'd like to learn more about neurodiversity, I have some resources linked in the description. Back to happier topics, Heated Rivalry has been nominated for and won several awards. It was unfortunately ineligible for the Primetime Emmys because it was developed entirely by international studios, but it did win Outstanding New TV Series at the GLAAD Media Awards and Best TV Drama at the Queerties. Francois Arnaud also won a Queerty for Best TV Performance as Scott Hunter. Jacob Tierney and Brendan Brady were honored by the NYC LGBT Community Center with their Cultural Impact Award as well. None of this had been expected, but it's hard to argue with the results. Looking to the future, there is still much more to see. In the production stage, Tierney was discouraged from adapting the book's epilogue for the screen. Crave executive Rachel Goldstein believed that it could have been perceived as setting up a season 2 that, at the time, was nowhere close to guaranteed. Halfway through the release of season 1, that second season was greenlit in a surprise announcement from Crave, with HBO Max returning for worldwide distribution. This only happened because so many people resonated with the show in such a short time. While there is no clear indication that Heated Rivalry's written epilogue will be included in this, Season 2 will cover the long game and is currently slated to come out in 2027. I won't spoil that epilogue if you haven't read it, but I will say it would go a long way toward tying everything together in the next season. Tierney has also stated that he plans to include Shane's coming out to his team on screen, whereas in the book it wasn't directly depicted. There are as of yet no concrete plans for a Season 3, but it can be assumed to be on the horizon if Season 2 does well. This hypothetical follow-up would likely be adapted from Reed's upcoming final entry into the Game Changer series, Unrivaled. Without spoiling too much, Unrivaled has been stated to follow Shane and Ilya as they navigate their public life. The book's release was delayed due to complications with Reed's health, but she has repeatedly said she remains committed to making the book the best it can be. Connor Story and Hudson Williams will also not be hurting for work in the meantime. Both of them have seen their careers explode due to Heated Rivalry's popularity. Story has been cast in an upcoming A24 comedy titled Peaked alongside Laura Dern, and Williams snagged a role in another Crave series titled Yaga alongside big names like Carrie-Anne Moss and Noah Reed. Tierney is getting more work as well, and it was recently announced that he had sold a show that would explore the relationship between Alexander the Great and Aristotle to Netflix. All in all, the future looks bright. No one spends this long on a video before even getting to any real analysis without either loving or hating the thing they're discussing. If it wasn't obvious enough from everything prior to this point, I love Heated Rivalry. A lot. I went from having never heard of it to watching the first 2 episodes to then reading the entire book series before the season 1 finale had even been released. Some of that famous hyperfixation shining through. This show, its source material, and its actors and characters have meant a lot to me. Let me tell you why. Heated Rivalry is very heavy on pretty men whose teeth might be a bit too perfect to believably be hockey players, doing things to each other that would make Oscar Wilde blush. This is true of the book as well, though with a lot more detail, to the point that Francois Arnaud and Christina Chang were initially reluctant to join because of a perception about sex being the focus of the script. I'm not gonna lie, I consider myself to be a pretty open person, and I still had some of the same feelings about the books before actually reading them. But I think each of those moments feel more natural and less gratuitous because they're used to advance the plot. Like Tierney said in that quote I referenced near the beginning of the video, the story doesn't progress in the same way without them. This is one of the primary ways these characters learn about themselves and each other before they are finally given space to explore deeper. And I don't think the story is any less for using sex the way it does. Of course, I also like the pretty men doing things to each other that would make Oscar Wilde blush, but we won't go down that route. While we're still on that topic though, I want to talk about the authenticity of what is portrayed on screen. I never played hockey myself, so I can't attest to any of that specifically, but there are plenty of actual hockey players at every level who have. They've talked about the rampant homophobia within hockey, and some have shared stories about similar experiences to what was portrayed between Ilya and Shane. To bring my own experience in, I played baseball for a very significant portion of my life. While it is not a sport known for fighting like hockey, I can't tell you how many deplorable things I heard in dugouts and locker rooms, sometimes even directed at me despite me being far from out at the time. That's just how it was. And I don't really regret that experience. I learned skills and strategy and explored the limits of what I thought I was capable of. But I say all this because Heated Rivalry, and more so the Game Changers books, reminded me of things I haven't thought about since I was a teenager. If I can relate to this story on that kind of a level, others have to have been hit by it even harder. And many were. The leading actors of the show, including Story, Williams, and Arnaud, as well as Tierney and Reed, have reported receiving DMs and letters from athletes past and present. This project meant something to people who felt they had to conceal a major part of themselves to have a successful athletic career. It even inspired former hockey player Jesse Khartoum to come out publicly. He left the sport at 17 because he couldn't reconcile hiding his sexuality to play the sport, but also didn't feel comfortable enough to be open about himself in that environment. In 2017, he came back to the sport and joined an LGBT-inclusive team called Cutting Edges. Reflecting back, he notes that it is impossible to know where his career could have gone had he continued playing, but now showing his pride on the ice feels like home. Cortoons is a story that went viral, and there have been many other real-life effects as well. Other LGBT-inclusive teams and clubs like Seattle Pride Hockey Association have become much more visible. The NHL itself saw an over 40% rise in ticket sales due to interest generated by Heated Rivalry. Players and even the commissioner of the NHL, Gary Bettman, have embraced the show. They say the hockey is terrible, and I don't have the knowledge to dispute that, but the message and impact is there. The characters might get something of a Cinderella story, not to imply that they don't still struggle greatly, but their story sends a message that living authentically is possible. Speaking of impact, let's talk about career impact for those involved in the creation of Heated Rivalry. I'm sure most will probably know by now, but in case you don't, Connor Story and Hudson Williams were both working as waiters before this project became their breakout success. Both had played a few small roles in other productions previously, with Story having a slightly longer resume, but an acting career was still mostly a dream. The success of this show changed all that. It also changed things for Rachel Reed. 4 days before Jacob Tierney reached out to ask her about adapting her books into a show, she was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. What are the odds, right? For those that don't know, Parkinson's is a progressive neurodegenerative disorder that causes difficulty in controlling movement. Translation, it causes tremors, stiff muscles, impaired balance, and other physical symptoms. And it will get worse over time. Imagine having 2 life-changing conversations in less than a week. If you're wondering, yes, this is what spurred the decision to delay the release of Unrivaled. But the diagnosis isn't what I'm talking about. Because of the success of Tierney's adaptation of her work, an expert on Parkinson's heard her story and reached out with an offer to help. Now she is on a path to getting much-needed treatment after sitting on a 5-year waiting list since 2023. That's what you call a game changer. Continuing on the topic of Reed, there is one more thing I want to address before I get into the show itself. To state the obvious, she's a woman writing romance novels about queer male hockey players. I know there are those out there who feel certain ways about that, and I would be lying if I said I wasn't one of them for a bit. From the outside, it does seem a bit unusual for someone who would have never had any relatable experiences to write about such a topic. But that's the thing about experience. It's translatable. We are all more alike than we are different, and let's be honest, it's completely impossible for writers to share every experience with their characters. There is of course another point that could be made about fetishization, but having read the books, I genuinely do not believe that is in any way the point. I saw it described somewhere as women enjoying the portrayal of a different side of men that they don't often get to see. Honestly, whatever the case may be, I don't really care. I'm not here to dismiss or exclude anyone. Reed is a private person and she should be allowed that. She doesn't need to be a part of the LGBT community or in any other way justify the work she's done. She has created something wonderful, and I would consider her a part of the family any day of the week. So, about the show. Heated Rivalry is, without exaggeration, one of the best adaptations of any media I've personally had the pleasure of viewing. And I'm talking quality of adaptation here, which contributed greatly to the overall quality of the show. It was faithful to the source material in ways that few adaptations even dare to be, and the changes it did make felt like they had a purpose. This meant that themes and plot points were preserved and served their intended purpose. It wasn't a total rewrite using the same character names. Among other things, this meant that the struggle these characters went through was not sanitized to be more palatable. Heated Rivalry tells a story that is raw and real, and most importantly, relatable. That said, I wanted to highlight a few of the moments on either side of this dichotomy. From the beginning, much of the pacing and order of events is actually pretty spot on. Many minor day-to-day details are skipped over because they simply aren't relevant to the story of Shane and Ilya. This changes somewhat drastically in episode 3, and while I fully understand why, I do think some of what was cut was important. Now, cramming a full novel into an hour of television is a daunting task, and I think they did it very well. But there are some things I missed. Kip's family dynamic was changed for one thing. While I love the reworked version of his already supportive dad, I missed his mom and big sister Megan. And I missed the dinner that Scott crashes. None of these things super directly contributed to the story moving forward, but they were nice details. Elena was also given much more character development in the book, and I plan to just continue assuming her promotion and move to LA still happened off-screen. The one genuine problem with Hunter as an episode is the timeline. Scott and Kip weren't meant to meet in 2014 prior to the Sochi Olympics. They were supposed to meet in the season that saw the Admirals win the not-so-Stanley Cup. According to Francois Arnaud, their scenes were shot under the assumption that there would be a 6-month gap between Kip's birthday and the championship. However, when everything was edited together, it became 3 years. The continuity mistake was covered in post-production using ADR, automated dialogue replacement for those unfamiliar, for Scott's MVP acceptance speech. So, yeah, there was a glaring continuity error. Ultimately, I don't find that it takes me out of the story too much. The pace of all the time skips makes it feel like it was supposed to originally anyway, in my opinion. In the next episode, Rose, there is one small thing I want to highlight. During the scene where Shane and Ilya are lounging on the couch waiting for their tuna melts to be ready, Ilya makes a quick mention of Ryan Price. This hulking enforcer is the main character of his own book, Tough Guy, and briefly played with the Raiders before being traded yet again. While there is a part of me that wishes they had included the airplane scene, I'm glad he was mentioned at all. In fact, this reference reads almost like an Easter egg included only for those who had read the books, which is something I greatly appreciate. We'll come back to the club scene at the end of this episode in a moment. Shane and Rose's dinner conversation in I'll Believe in Anything is almost a direct word-for-word quote from the book. Yes, including the square peg in a round hole lines. And I can't tell you how much I love that. Reading it tickled me greatly, and seeing it performed even more so. There was one thing missing from Scott's public declaration of love at the end of the episode, but it was implied to have still happened off-screen via a line at Una and David's. In the epilogue of Game Changer, Book 1 for clarity, Scott and Kip and some of his teammates, including Carter Vaughn and Eric Bennett, go to a local gay club that is hosting a Scott Hunter night. The only thing that makes it Scott Hunter night is that he is in attendance, but that's not the point. Ilya shows up as well, one of the only other NHL players to do so, despite Scott's public invitation and his acceptance speech. Of course, this couldn't have happened in exactly the same way since Kip was still in New York on screen, but I would have loved to see this moment between Scott and Ilya. His character was robbed of some development like this that happened in the more minor moments. The same could be said for Shane, but Ilya was much more open about his exploration and connection with others. In some ways, at least. As for the final episode, I don't have too much to say regarding the adaptation. This version of Shane's cottage is a bit more low-key than what is seen in the book, and I honestly think it works better for the story being told. There is a slight change in the sequence of a few lines after that first I love you, but this doesn't change anything for the story. If anything, it actually allows a moment to breathe. The one thing I can't seem to get over about this episode is actually ridiculously tiny. Shane's line where he asks,
"Does it fucking kill you too?"
reads differently in the book. There, he asks, "Does it feel like agony for you too?" And Ilya gives the same response. The book version just feels more impactful to me. I don't even hate the version that is shown on screen, but I can't help thinking about that difference every time I watch that scene. Okay, I said we would come back to the club scene, and here it is. I have to say, the music selection for this show was immaculate. From the original themes by Peter Peter to the licensed songs like All the Things She Said, both the original and the remix, and I'll Believe in Anything, every beat just hits right. It's not often that 20-plus-year-old songs re-enter the charts, but here they managed just that. I particularly love that the beginning of I'll Believe in Anything is sampled at the beginning of the third episode as Scott is coming up to the smoothie shop. Plus, the synth bass line in the main theme just does something to me. I can't help but want to dance. The music selections help to keep a fun atmosphere between all the serious topics, and they perfectly reflect the playful nature of both the enduring rivalry and the secret hookups. Here's the crux of everything, and in my opinion what made Heated Rivalry resonate the way it did with so many people. It told a daring story without fear or compromise. People watched it and realized that they weren't alone. Everyone who worked on it poured so much into it and weren't afraid to be a little too much in all the right ways. I say all of this not to imply that it has done more or better than any of the other queer representation that has come out in the last 5 to 10 years, but to highlight what is possible when queer stories are told authentically. We don't need to hide or conform to be worthy of recognition, success, and yes, love. From everything I have read about the plans for Season 2, it seems like it is going to be even bigger and better. Given everything we saw in Season 1, I expect it to tackle the long game just as thoroughly as it did Game Changer and Heated Rivalry. And I expect there to be tears, happy and otherwise. But growth is often fraught with pain. It's messy and uncomfortable. And it is necessary. I think that being uncomfortable is something to embrace because you might just learn something. Watch the gay hockey show with too much sex in it. Let yourself get lost in a crowd at a concert as you sing with one voice. Talk to your neighbor who moved here from another country. Open yourself to the experiences of others, and you'll learn not just about them, but about yourself as well. We have to learn as kids to get along and to share and to be tolerant of others. It's an uncomfortable process. I think we need to relearn those things as a global society. Let yourself be uncomfortable. Embrace it. You'll see yourself in many more places than you could ever dream. And knowing yourself is just as important as knowing others. To build connections, you must also know how you tick. But none of these things are prerequisites for each other. They can be done in any order at any time. I would argue they should be done as often as you can. The only truly scarce resource that we have in this life is time. Nothing will buy us more, and there's never any telling just how much we have left. What matters is whatever you decide matters to you. To borrow a quote from another one of my favorite shows at the moment, life is a heartbreaking, gorgeous blip in the universe. Everything matters, and nothing does. What has always been certain, time is both forever and achingly finite.
But what a shame it would be not to live every moment.
Heated Rivalry is a very strong piece of television from a production standpoint, even with that one continuity error. Shots are tight, audio is crisp, and lighting is used for dramatic effect in ways that many studios today seem to be averse to. Game of Thrones. Settings are believable despite never having actually shot anything in Moscow. They even got real crowds in real hockey arenas, with actual hockey players on the ice. While they may not have been playing a super technical game, everything about the premise of the story felt real. Every frame is visually interesting and, dare I say, beautiful. That, on its own, would be an achievement. Combined with a moving story, stellar acting, and a huge cultural impact, it begins approaching a level of masterpiece. It isn't perfect, as of course nothing is, but there is a certain beauty in vulnerability and imperfection, in bearing your work for others to see, and not pretending to be anything other than what you are. I love this show as much as I do because I value authenticity above all, and I believe that simple choice can change the world. If all of us were able to see each other as we truly are, maybe we could focus more on the heat and less on the rivalry. With huge thanks to my friends Jack Kiley and Sean Farrick who gave me feedback on the script for the biggest video project I have undertaken on this channel so far, I suppose it's time to wrap things up. Thank you for allowing me to be with you for however brief a time. Don't forget to live each day intentionally. You may have noticed by now that I like quotes, so here's one more. To live is the rarest thing in the world. Most people exist. That's all. Oscar Wilde. Let me know if you have any differing opinions or any suggestions of other media I should cover. Just don't start a fight in my comments. Please like the video if you enjoyed and join the family if you want to see more nerdy shit like this. You can also find me across social media under the same name. Remember, love recklessly. Start with yourself.